All right, let's evaluate some arguments in support of ethical egoism. When we look at arguments in support of an ethical theory, what we're doing is we're looking at the reasons that ethicists have offered to justify their claim that we should base our moral judgments on and base our actions on the principles of that ethical theory. So one of the arguments for ethical egoism that's been offered is oftentimes called the efficiency and effectiveness argument. It goes like this. Premise number one, the most important thing to every individual is his or her best interests. Premise number two, we ought to do whatever will best promote everyone's interests. Premise number three, the best way to promote everyone's interests is for each of us to adopt a policy of pursuing our own interests exclusively. Therefore, each of us should adopt the policy of pursuing our own interests exclusively. All right, so basically the idea here is, look, my interests matter to me most, your interests matter to you most, and we ought to do whatever's going to promote everyone's best interests the most, and the best way to do that is to allow everyone to pursue their own best interests exclusively. And therefore, that's what we should do. Okay, so of course, we want to think really carefully about all of these premises. Are the three premise statements true? Because if they are, perhaps they lead to the conclusion statement also being true. But if we can find reason to doubt any of the premise statements, then we don't necessarily have to accept the conclusion of this argument for these reasons. So we might zero in on premise number one. Is it really the case that the most important thing to every individual is his or her best interests? And we might say, well, I don't know, is that what parents assume? Do parents assume that the most important thing to them is their own best interest, or do they make sacrifices for their children? Do their children's best interests sometimes matter more to them? Now, of course, we could counter that and say, well, yeah, but it's really in a parent's best interest to have their child's best interests as in mind, okay? So in a weird kind of paradoxical way, maybe we could make the argument that it's in a parent's best interest to put their child's best interests first, okay? So maybe premise number one has a problem, maybe not. Premise number three seems questionable. The best way to promote everyone's interests is for each of us to adopt a policy of pursuing our own interests exclusively. Is that really the case? Is that the best way to do it? Premise number two is probably true. We ought to do whatever is going to best promote everyone's interests, okay? Is it really the case that the best way to do that is to assume that each person is going to be advocating for their best interest exclusively? Or are there other ways to promote everyone's best interests that don't involve each individual pursuing their own best interests exclusively?